I am a poet, a weaver of stories, keeper of tales, lover of lyric, legend, and lore. I protected the past to enrich the present. I preserved the past to touch the future. That's the power of a poet. You see, if tales are not told and told again, they often disappear. Gone for good, never to return. Many of the old stories were passed down entirely by word of mouth until some lover of the past and guardian of the future decided to write them down. Truth be told, that writer was thinking of you. Yes, you, when they decided to take pen to paper. At least, I know that's what I was thinking about. I was thinking of you. I am Laura Aldrich Fueling Hinsdale. Born in 1846, I love the written word from my earliest memories. I'm here to pass down a beautiful love story, one I wrote about long, long ago. My poem recalling this love story was entitled The Live Oak Ring, part of my book entitled Legends and Lyrics of the Gulf Coast, published in 1896. It tells the legend of the ring and the oak, a mighty tree which still stands today on a beautiful beachfront parcel where the lovely Episcopal Church of the Redeemer once stood. You see, that's how I found myself in Biloxi. My husband, Robert Hinsdale, became the second rector of that historic church. He had been a professor and was a learned man. Upon our arrival, we were simply entranced. Biloxi's natural, almost exotic beauty was intoxicating, and her rich history mesmerizing. Biloxi's beauty and rich history served as golden inspiration for my poetry. The prose of my pages was filled with images of Gulf and gull, pine and magnolia, natives and explorers. Poetry flowed from my pen like moss from the mighty live oak. With one work, I could not only practice versification, but also record the fascinating legends of the area. There are 32 poems contained in my book, detailing subjects like the discovery of the area, the influence of French and Spanish, and the settlers they brought. Prior to discovery, the life of the Native Americans, the Aborigine of the area, is also described in verse. Have you heard the legend of the ring and the oak? Before my book, it was just a story, but I saved it for all of you. And the ring itself, it's still there, for all to see and hearts to wonder. It survived many hurricanes. Such a beautifully romantic love story was made even more dear by the fragility and passage of an era, a way of life. Here's a portion of my epic poem. 'Twas here she grew, flower of the wild, a maiden of Biloxi's race, a chieftain's fair and only child, a blithesome maid of winsome grace. The bravest warriors of the chase to her their trophies brought, and for a glimpse of her sweet face, the proudest warrior sought. But one there came with plumed crest, a Natchez warrior from the west. His feet the fleetest brave outvied, swift as the mountain roe. But when he reached the maiden's side, his footsteps loitered slow. The warrior sought the chieftain's side, a Natchez ring he bore. He asked the maiden for his bride, to leave his side no more. The chieftain answered as in glee, when a ring grows on yonder tree and circles yonder bough, then you may bear my child from me, and wed with ring and vow. The bright waves laughed, and through the tree there sounded in an undertone voices of tender witchery. She loves but thee alone. Love cannot lose its own. Did that snippet whet your appetite to know the whole story? I hope so. And if so, then you must read it for yourself. I'll give you a hint. Love wins. Love always wins.
I can see why you love this time of day, Mom.
Oh, I do. I would be done with all the lightkeeper's work. The wicks would be trimmed and the lamp would be filled with oil. And soon I would climb those 57 steps up to the top of the lighthouse, where I would get the best view of the sunset on the entire Gulf Coast.
Even at a young age, I knew we were lucky to be caretakers of the Biloxi Lighthouse. It's hard work, not something you do for very long if you don't love it.
And not something you get rich doing. You know, when I became the lighthouse keeper, when my husband Perry passed away, your father, in the 1860s, Lord rest his soul, I made $560 a year. Well, that's $12,500 a year in 2023. It's not a lot of money. But you know, we didn't need for much. We had a garden, and the bounty of the sea kept us pretty self-sufficient.
Well, I know we weren't wasteful with our money.
Well, there was no time for any time off in this line of work, but when you love what you do, it doesn't always have to feel like work. And the job provided us with a house on the beach because we had to be there. We had to keep that light burning, and we had to keep all that glass clean. Cleaning that glass was a never-ending task. I don't know if you remember this, but that lamp used to burn lard oil.
Oh, how could I forget? It smelled something awful as it burned. The soot made the lens so filthy, not to mention the windows. Cleaning all of that glass was a daily task. So much glass and brass to polish. I was so excited when the lard lamp was replaced by a kerosene lamp.
I bet you were. And isn't it true that when you were keeper, the lamp was electrified? Oh, those young ones, they just don't know how good they have it nowadays.
Mama, you're only 15 years older than me. Your point is well taken, though. I was so excited when the light was electrified in 1926. Less than a year after you passed. I don't think I could have kept the kerosene lamp burning without your help.
I bet not. And I couldn't have been lighthouse keeper for 52 years without your help. That's another thing I loved about the job. It gave us so much time together.
Me too. I so enjoyed that. All this talk of work and cleaning makes the job sound so tedious. It was exciting too. Do you remember that storm in 1916? It was right after the 4th of July. We were up all night after that poor pelican was blown into the lighthouse.
That poor thing. We were so lucky it didn't slam right in and break the lamp. But we spent a long, wet and windy night cleaning up all that glass. I don't know if you remember this. You were about 12 or 13 years old. But one morning during a winter storm, I looked out and there was a fisherman struggling with his overturned boat. And I told you to go get your Uncle Anson, remember? And he hurried and he saved that poor man.
I do. I felt so proud and grown up to play a part in that rescue. That was the first time I truly felt the love for job of lighthouse keeper. That love was surely tested in 1893. Do you remember that storm?
Of course I do. Our little house filled up with water, and I had to stay in the lighthouse. I had to keep the light burning because, you see, it's times like those that people need us the most. But we kept that light burning. But that morning, when the storm surge went out, I just knew I was done for. But she stood fast. It was a horrible storm, though. It took us years to make all those repairs.
You know, I heard that our home was destroyed in a storm that folks called Camille in 1969. Did you know they started naming these storms in the 1950s to help keep track of them?
Our poor little home. It was there for so long. But that's so interesting. Oh, I hope they never name a storm after us. Just imagine Hurricane Miranda and Maria Youngins.
That's not really how that works.
Well, one thing I know for sure is no matter how many things change, the lighthouse remains the same. Well, I guess she's been standing now for 175 years. You see, our light is a beacon of hope, and she's loved by mariners and fishermen alike because when they see that light, they know that soon they will dock their boat and head on into loved ones.
I don't know if you recall the hymn that you said to me in your last hours. I believe it was called My Faith Looks Up to Thee.
Of course I do. And my favorite verse, as the lighthouse keeper, was, when life's dark maze I tread, and griefs around me spread, be thou my guide, lead darkness into day.
Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream.
Ah, well, that's how you made me feel on that rainy day in 1888, George Dugan. You made me feel like life was just a dream. Oh, me just 17, you a mere 18. The old people said 'twas bad luck to have raindrops on your wedding day, but that made no matter to me, not one iota, nor you neither.
Or me.
Oh, we were young and fearless. I was so proud and happy. Why, I married the hardest working fisherman in Biloxi. It wasn't just the two of us for long. We were soon joined by our firstborn, Henry, and by the time we reached our 27th wedding anniversary, we were parents to 12. 6 boys and 6 girls. It still saddens me, though, to think of those newborns we'd lost over the years.
No, Ella. We never lost them. We kept them right here the whole time. I was so proud of our Dugan clan. Strong boys, pretty girls, sweet as strawberries they were. And you raised them all so well.
Well, you broke your back filling their bellies, keeping shoes on their feet, and a roof over their heads. No, I couldn't have asked for better. Our boys could all navigate the waters of the Mexican Sea in a Biloxi schooner by the time they were 12 or 13. Now, not all of our children chose work on the water, but Freddie and Arthur, they were fine sailors, just like their papa. We spent most nights in that little house on Fayard Street with smiles on our faces, both of us raring to get up the next day and do it all over again.
Oh, Mary Ella Bennett Dugan. The truth is, I would have roped and towed the full moon in from that island for you if that's what you wanted. But the best I could manage was a couple of pretty redfish for some of your delicious coubillon. Now, I told both Atkinson and McDuffie on that last trip to save the very best for you. Hey, put them aside for Ella, boys. Oh, Ella, I'm just sorry I never got to say goodbye. Some things were just meant to be. The last I thought of was your smile on our rainy wedding day. Row, row, row your boat, life is but a dream.
Life can be so cruel. George kissed me on my cheek as he walked out the door that morning. Our son Arthur gave me a quick hug. He and his wife had just started a family of their own. Our youngest Frank was only 3 that July 4th, 1916. The sky was as blue and clear as any I'd ever seen, but I knew good and well that the weather here didn't tell me a thing about the weather out there, on that gulf that looks so serene and calm. Looks can be deceiving. There was no talk of hurricane prediction in those days. We would have thought that crazy talk. There was no radar or satellites or computers. There was no way of knowing. Every time a sailor stepped on board a schooner, he took his life in his own hands. There was no way for any of us to know that the July hurricane of 1916 would be, by your standards, a Category 3 with winds of 120 miles per hour. July 5th, it was a night of terror. My memory is a blur of children crying, candles, rosary beads, and holy water. The days and weeks to come were an agonizing haze of waiting, waiting, waiting. My brother-in-law, Johnny Dugan, he searched aboard the Ursula C, and my brother, Boy Bennett, searched with them. Our son searched. All of Biloxi searched. The U.S. Coast Guard searched. Every island combed. Ship, Chandelier, Cat, Cry-Ho Bay, Point Comfort, Earl Island, Bird Island, Breton Island, North Key, Taylor's Pass, Battledore, Neptune. No sign, no sign, no sign. For weeks, I'd walk to the piers and I'd bring along Frankie and his sisters, Carrie, Lottie, and Henrietta, and we'd hold hands, and we'd look to the horizon looking for a tiny speck, looking for anything. And then on August 11th, we got word that the Emma Harvey was found. The schooner was located in East Point Pass, just 1 mile out of Santa Rosa Island, Florida. My heart skipped a beat that beat right out of my chest. Hope, sweet hope, flooded my soul. But there was no crew aboard, and in fact, the Emma Harvey was found belly up. But maybe, just maybe, they were injured and taken in by strangers. Yes, that's it. As soon as they were well enough, they'd make their way back home. Back home. Home. Triumph or tragedy? Is it whispered in the wind? Is it written in the stars? At what point in our lives do we choose to go down one road instead of the other? I was widowed at age 46, left alone to care for 12 children. I knew the loss of child and spouse all in one day. But I was grateful for family and friends who came to our aid and helped me see the younger children all raised up to adulthood. I was grateful for the love of a good man who provided for his family every day that he lived. I was grateful for work in seafood factories. I was grateful for my beautiful children who grew up strong. Some days I'd still walk to the piers with one of my children or grandchildren. Till the end of my days, I found myself waiting. I'm waiting for ships that never come in, watching and waiting in vain. It seems that life's stormy sea holds nothing for me but broken dreams and shattered schemes. With each day of sorrow, I love to pretend one more tomorrow, and waiting will end. I'm waiting for ships that never come in. I wonder where they can be.
I am William Tisdale, but most folks called me Doc. I was born September 1st, 1920 in Summerall, Mississippi, the first of 3 children to Jennings and Margaret Churchill Tisdale. My father died before I was 9. To help support my family during the Great Depression, I worked in seafood factories before the school day began, delivered newspapers, and when I was in high school, shoveled oyster shells to help support and construct the foundation for the seawall being built along Biloxi's shoreline. I really enjoyed being a member of Boy Scouts Troop 1. Today it's known as Troop 212. In my early years, we were often forced to move in the middle of the night because we couldn't scrape together the $4 to pay the monthly rent. When I was a senior in high school, I didn't have the 50 cents to attend the senior class dinner. And I was too embarrassed to go to the senior dance because the only pair of shoes I owned was a well-worn pair of tennis shoes. You see, we were very poor, but everybody we knew was also very poor. When I was 17, I joined the Naval Reserves and graduated the following year from Biloxi High School, 1938. Shortly afterwards, I enlisted in the Navy. They fed you 3 meals a day, they gave you a set of uniforms, and they paid you. I kept 1/4 of my salary and sent the rest home to Mama and my sisters. I served in the U.S. Navy from 1940 to 1946 as a pharmacist mate. I saw action aboard the USS Mulaney, the USS Blue Ridge, and the USS Roe. I was stationed at the Brooklyn Naval Yard, the Aleutian Islands, and New Guinea. At the time of my discharge, I was a proud Chief Petty Officer. Following my discharge, I married Florence Constance Hoffman of Bayside, New York. The following year, we moved to New Orleans, Louisiana, where I enrolled at Tulane University, and after 3 years of college, was accepted to Tulane Medical School, where I graduated in 1952. We then moved to Nashville, Tennessee, where I served my internship at Mid-State Baptist Hospital. Finishing my internship, I opened my practice on Central Avenue in North Biloxi. Today that's known as D'Iberville, close to where the Scarlet Pearl Casino is located today. Some of my patients couldn't afford to pay me, so they left baskets of fresh fruit and fresh vegetables on our porch. In 1958, I moved my family and my practice to Biloxi, where I frequently misplaced the medical bills of those patients who couldn't afford to pay me for my services. For a number of years, I volunteered to offer free physicals to the football players at Notre Dame High School. In 1968, I was elected to the State's House of Representatives, only the second practicing physician to sit in the House. I was involved in the enabling legislation that established the Mississippi Gulf Coast Coliseum and sponsored and authored the first Nurse Practice Act in Mississippi. In 1969, following Hurricane Camille, and after having delivered literally a couple of thousand babies, in fact, I may have delivered some of you, I closed my practice and went to work at Howard Memorial Hospital, where I was the first emergency room physician in Harrison County. After working at Howard Memorial for a number of years, I moved to a newer hospital in West Biloxi, Gulf Coast Community Hospital, where I had helped design the emergency room facilities and served there as the Director of Emergency Medicine and Trauma for several years until my retirement. But it was a brief retirement because I went back to work at the Biloxi VA in the emergency room there for 3 years and then finally retired for good. I was a member of Magnolia Lodge FNAM number 120, a Church of the Redeemer, and Mountain Branch Hunting Club. I also was a past member of Les Perot and Revelers Carnival Associations and served as one of King D'Iberville's dukes in the Biloxi Mardi Gras parade in the 1960s. I really love to hunt and fish.
I am Connie Tisdale. I was born in Bayside on Long Island, New York, but I lived most of my life here in Biloxi. My father was Eddie Hoffman, one of New York's finest, a Central Park policeman. My mother, Florence Walsh, immigrated from Ireland. She was an RN, and I would soon follow in her footsteps after completing 3 years of nurses training at Lenox Hill Hospital. I was still in training, not yet 18, when I met Will on a New York City subway train during the time of the Second World War. He happened to sit near me and struck up a conversation. When I saw that red hair, those blue eyes, and white teeth, I wanted to salute. He looked so handsome in his Navy sailor's uniform. We chatted the entire 45-minute ride until it was my time to disembark. We shared an interest in medicine as he was a pharmacist mate who would soon be sent to the Pacific Theater after we'd only had a couple of dates. We kept up a correspondence, and when he returned many months later, I was eager to introduce him to my parents. My policeman father was not pleased to hear I was bringing home a sailor, And my strict Irish mother was less than happy to hear where he was from, Mississippi. Will always made sure to call my mother Mrs. Hoffman. In time, he proposed. I completed my diploma. The war ended, and Will was honorably discharged from the Navy. We were married December 19, 1945, in the Brooklyn Naval Yard Chapel, with only a couple of witnesses invited in at the last minute. You see, an unexpected snowstorm blew in, and none of my family could make it to the ceremony. That's one of the things I loved about Biloxi. It very rarely snows here. We moved to New Orleans for Will's schooling. The plan was for me to be the breadwinner while he earned his medical degree. I worked for a few months at Ochsner's Hospital at night, but then the stork was circling and our first son was on the way. 13 months after our wedding vows, William Edward, whom we nicknamed Gig, was born. With a baby in my arms, it was no longer possible for me to work. Those were some really lean times. If I were feeling sorry for myself, I'd splurge on a 10-cent magazine. And if I couldn't find a dime, I'd ask my husband for it. Do you remember what you'd tell me?
How could I forget? What did you do with the dime I gave you last week?
Really, those were the days. After Will finished medical school, the stork made regular deliveries. 3 more sons and 2 daughters, Paul, George, David, Connie, and Jill. We did our best to instill in our children a sense of duty, faith, and service. Tragically, in 1960, we lost our youngest son, 4-year-old David, in an accident. It was after this heartbreak that I returned to nursing when Will brought me to work in his office. I always had loved being a nurse, helping people and taking care of others. For many years, I was a volunteer nurse with the American Red Cross and a regular blood donor. Later, I worked at Howard Memorial Hospital and was one of Biloxi Public Schools' original school nurses. I was active in civic organizations such as the Doctors' Wives Club, Order of the Amaranth, and the Order of the Eastern Star. I was a founding member of the Hibernia Marching Society and the Gulf Coast Community Hospital's Sunshine Guild Auxiliary. I enjoyed riding floats at Mardi Gras with the Gulf Coast Carnival Association and was honored to be the 1962 Queen of Revelers and the 1966 Biloxi Lions Club's Mother of the Year. As a member of the Episcopal Church of the Redeemer, I served on the vestry and for many years taught the preschool Sunday school class in memory of my little son David. Will supported me in all of these things. He was my rock. Together, we suffered the loss of another son, George, in 1997. We were married for 56 years, in love until the end, when I passed in 2002. Please let me share with you a letter my Will wrote to me during our wartime courtship, when our future was so uncertain. July 3rd, 1943. Dearest Green Eyes, I haven't received a letter from you in the past 3 days. Is anything wrong or what? I received the penny, the one for my thought about how deep the lake was, and I have now etched with acid this into the surface. From Connie to Bill, June 29th, 1943. I shall keep it until I can no longer know you and treasure you as I do now. Incidentally, I don't think that day shall ever come. I have been offered a penny for my thoughts before, but this is the first time I ever received the penny. What made you think of sending it anyhow? I'm glad you did, though, even if it was in the shortest letter I ever got. It will be 2 more weeks now before I can see you again, and I don't know if I'm going to be here that long or not. We have all of our crew now, and it is merely a question of time before I am gone. Connie, I'm usually not as forward as I will be forced to be the next time I see you. You have been out with me twice, and you should know what kind of a man I am by now. So if I seem a little bold, forgive me, please. It's just that I will be trying to make every moment count. I hope you feel the same about this matter as I do, because in all likelihood this will be the last time I see you for a long time to come. Maybe the last time forever. Who knows? Please let me know what hours you are going to be working on the night of the 16th, and what hours you will be off that Saturday and Sunday, and if there is any way you can get off just a little longer. I must see you as much as possible, dear, because you have grown upon me as swiftly as wildfire sweeps across a prairie in a windstorm. The first time your lips touched mine in that first shy kiss of yours, a little part of you unconsciously entered my blood, and now each time I think of you, or look at your picture, or get a letter from you, my spirit soars and my heart throbs, because I know that I love a woman worthy of being loved by any man, but whom I hope will never love anyone but me. If you don't, I don't quite know what I should do, because forever after the world for me would be desolate and dark. Goodbye for now, you adorable creature. Think about what I have just written you for the next couple of weeks. I love you, darling. Bill.
We are Will and Connie's children. I am Paul, the number 2 son, and this is Jill, the number 2 daughter.
Thank you.
Hello, Jake Mladinich here, and this is my lovely wife, June. And we spent a wonderful 58 years together right here in Biloxi, our home. We were both born and raised here, both went to Biloxi High School. I guess you can say I'm the product of the American dream. My parents, A. Jake Mladinich Sr. and Mary Peritich Mladinich, were Slavic immigrants that came to this country in the late 1800s with a dream for themselves, a dream for a family, for food to eat, and a place to live in peace. It doesn't sound like much, only it was everything. And in achieving these basics, my father was free to discover his talents for business and pursue and amass more than he ever thought possible. I guess if there's such a thing as a business gene, I certainly inherited it.
You certainly did. Ethel June Stosich Mladinich here, and what my husband is modestly trying to tell you is that he was a keen and highly successful businessman. And me, I was the one always by his side, through the good and the bad, the ups and the downs, and the ins and the outs of running an entertainment empire.
Well, now empire might be a stretch, but it was certainly all a great challenge. Kept the two of us always on our toes.
Now's not the time for modesty. Let's tell the folks about our adventure.
Well, after many years working in the seafood industry, my father managed to acquire waterfront property and built a well-known complex of tourist-related family businesses right on the beach in Biloxi. I worked in the family businesses for decades before ultimately inheriting a portion of them, which included the Fiesta nightclub, the Cabana Beach Apartments, the Sea and Sirloin restaurant, among others. Now, the Hot Stop restaurant was another of my father's businesses. I was a young man working in my father's restaurant when in walked this beautiful young secretary from Keesler Air Force Base. I noticed her visits got to be more and more often. I guess she just couldn't stay away.
Now, Jake, you know I liked the food. A lot. And besides, I lived very close to the Hot Stop. As soon as I graduated Biloxi High in 1945, I began working at Keesler Air Force Base as a secretary in the general's office. Back in those days, they called it Keesler Field. I truly enjoyed office work. I excelled at it. That job prepared me for what was to lie ahead, all the bookkeeping and administrative work that would come with being a business owner. And in 1957, I married Jake Mladinich. We would become parents to 5 children: Mary Kathleen, Jake Jr., Andra June, April, and Tanya. Poor Jake. He found himself living in a house with 5 females. With a large family and multiple businesses, life became very busy very quickly. And we knew instinctively that we would have to make the 2 of us a priority. It started out of the blue. One night we found ourselves on our patio as the sun was sinking into the sky, one of those beautiful Biloxi sunsets that remind you of orange and raspberry sherbet, dreamy and sweet. I noticed that Jake was holding my hand. I know it doesn't sound like much, just a little thing, but it was a beautiful and serene moment, and I knew right then and there that I wanted to continue having those moments together. And Jake agreed with a big smile.
That's right. So we decided right there to watch the sunset together every day. It was our way of prioritizing us, even if it meant just spending a few moments together each day.
It's a good thing to have a constant, something to ground you. Life can get away from you if you let it, so don't let it.
That's right. Now, not only were you essential in helping run the businesses, you really knew how to enjoy life. Through the lens of your camera or through your paintbrush, you rose with the morning sun to greet each day, and when you weren't tending to the children, you were reading. You made sure our children knew that learning was a lifelong endeavor.
When you made sure our children knew the importance of work and that responsibility is a way to show people that you care for them. We put our children to work in our businesses in their teen years. To whom much is given, much is required. They also learn the importance of community through your many civic associations, which you were past president of the Slavic Benevolent Association, or as it is lovingly called now, the Slavonian Lodge, and that was very important to both of us as we both have Slavonian roots. You were past president of the Mississippi Gulf Coast Hotel Motel Association, past commissioner of the Biloxi Port Commission and the Point Cadet Development Commission, past board of directors of the Biloxi Chamber of Commerce, past vice president and longtime member of the Biloxi Businessmen's Club, and 2 of your favorites, the Biloxi Paternal Order of the Elks, Chapter 606, and the Biloxi Yacht Club, which is actually the 4th oldest yacht club in the nation. But enough with the facts. Let's talk about the fun of owning a nightclub.
Oh, where do we start? You know, I remember the time I hired this skinny, hairy kid from Pascagoula. He just finished college at USM, and frankly, I'd hired better singers, better guitar pickers, and certainly better lookers. But there was just something about the way this kid sang his songs. I guess you could say from the heart. I remember watching the audience that first night at Trader John's, and I knew they saw it too. Years later, that kid would return to Biloxi after he turned his songwriting talent into pure gold. He'd built a brand around his biggest hit song and was in town opening a Margaritaville casino in the city where it all started. And you know what that kid did? He gave me a shout out. Said I'd given him his first paid gig. Said, "Hey Jake, thanks. It all worked out." That meant a lot to me.
Jimmy, he was always such a sweetie. But what about the time we were almost shut down because everyone thought we had naked go-go dancers? In reality, the go-go dancers were wearing tan bodysuits and we were projecting psychedelic art onto them.
You know, there was also that time in the late 50s, Prof Carpenter called me to ask if I could help out a young Elvis Presley and his trio who had broken down on Tea Garden Road in Gulfport. You know, Prof talked us into hiring Elvis to play at the Fiesta, and I called my cousin Yankee Bahanovich to see what he thought. He listened to Elvis and wound up booking him at several other places like the Slavonian Lodge and the Keesler Officers Club. Yankee was the only registered booking agent in the state of Mississippi at the time. Now at the time, my good friend Robert Mitchum was in town, and I asked him if he thought Elvis should go to Hollywood. He thought Elvis could do with a manager and introduced Elvis to the man that managed him his entire career. Fate's a funny thing, isn't it?
It really is. Oh, but listen, they're playing our favorite song. Teardrops are falling from your Spanish eyes. We'd better hurry, honey, or we're gonna miss the sunset.
Okay.
I have found the one whom my soul loves.
We love, I believe it goes, I found him whom my soul loveth. I held him and I will not let him go. This psalm is perfect for the 2 of us. I believe our souls knew the moment that we met. I am Tamilia Fauché Fountain, and this good man is my husband, Willie Fountain. Willie was born in the north of Biloxi, Back Bay home of his parents, Antoine and Williamine Fountain, in 1882. A more joyful, fun-loving family did not exist. The Fountains were hard-working, God-loving people, and they loved to pass a good time too. Many were blessed with the gift of music and dance. They were loving to be together. When one needed help, they all came running. My husband, like his uncle and grandfathers before him, was a gifted boat builder and wood craftsman. Willie made wood come to life, whether it was in the creation of a working boat or even a small sailboat, like the one he built for our granddaughter, Deanna. Willie learned the art of boat building from his uncle, Martin Fountain, who was considered the finest schooner designer and builder by many experts. His designs are in the Smithsonian's American History Museum. Willie worked for his uncle and became renowned for his woodworking knowledge. He was called upon by the builders of the Redding House in downtown because the plans called for unusual half-shaped moon windows on the second floor. My favorite of Willie's creations was his hand-carved violins. They were things of beauty that made beautiful music. Of course, Willie also made music with his voice. His favorite song to sing to me was, "Let me call you sweetheart." I too loved to sing and would sing some in French.
A good woman is hard to find and worth far more than diamonds. Darling, who knew I'd find my diamond in New Orleans? But there you were.
I was born in 1877 to Theodule and Sophie Fauché at our home on Dumaine Street, one of the oldest in New Orleans. The Fauchés arrived in New Orleans from France around 1719, 158 years before I was born. Many are buried in the St. Louis Cemetery. They were a wealthy, prominent family. However, much of the wealth was lost after the Civil War, a war which my father fought. My parents were deceased by the time I was 23. In 1900, I was living with my sister, Adolphine Fauché Miller, on Crusoe Street in Biloxi. By that time, William Frank Fountain and I had already met. It did not take long for our souls to be made known to us, what they knew instantly. In 1903, we were married against my family's wishes. You see, people who once had money sometimes still think they're better than couillon. In 1904, we were living on the Fountain family property off Racetrack Road. Soon, we would become parents to our oldest, Willie Jr. He would be joined by Sydney, Lois, Earl, Vivian Elena, George, and our baby Ruby May. The children were all baptized in the Mission Parish of Sacred Heart, as Willie and I were devout Catholics and members of that parish. In many ways, life was perfect. Willie would play the violin in the evenings when the day's work was done and supper had finished. The children would lay in their beds with the windows open and let the music lull them to sleep at our little home on the bay. After, the two of us would sit on the back porch swing, holding hands, enjoying the silence. When we retired for the night, we drop to our knees at bedside and give thanks for our many blessings. Young parents, let your children catch you praying. Come dawn, Willie was up before me. He would bring me my coffee every morning. My beloved caught or grew most of our food. Our sons were fine fishermen and would gather our meals from our front yard, which was the bay. Shrimp, crabs, mullet, trout were all plentiful. What we didn't catch or grow, we traded for. I've been told my meals were delicious and fit for a king. Some of the recipes that I passed down were gumbo, oyster soup, crab stew, jambalaya, and galettes, which we ate with our own fig preserves. No one leaves this valley of tears without loss. Nothing prepares you for the loss of your own child. In 1960, we lost our oldest, Willie Jr. Our hearts were broken. This loss changed us. My health suffered due to dementia. 3 years later, I died in April of 1963. My beloved Willie joined me a very short 2 months after my death. Dr. Bolton told our daughter Ruby that Willie died of a broken heart, for no other cause could be found. It was Willie's wishes to be buried here in the Biloxi Cemetery, not the Fountain Cemetery adjacent to our property. Willie did not wish to cause daily grief for our children or grandchildren living on our property. Hardships, hurricanes, grief, even death, these could not diminish what God had joined together. Our life was beautiful, thanks be to God. We lived to celebrate 59 years of marriage. We knew and loved 30 grandchildren and 53 great-grandchildren. Both a granddaughter and great-granddaughter are named for me.
Weeping may last through the night, but joy comes with the morning.
Life, you only get one shot. There are no second chances. If you mess it up, they can't let you come back for a do-over. So when you find you've made a mistake, grab that bull by the horns and fix it before it's too late. That's what I did, and it made all the difference. I am Vera Ducate Bond Chin. I had 2 great loves in my life. The first was my father, William K.M. Ducate. He was born in Fredericksburg, Indiana, and found himself in Biloxi sometime in the 1870s. The L&N Railroad was his employer, and they sent him here to work as a telegraph operator. That was on around the time the L&N was connecting the railway from New Orleans all the way to Mobile. Father spent 12 years here in Biloxi working for the L&N. He met a beautiful young Biloxi girl and married her, Linda Rose Leonard. By 1881, Father joined with Lazaro Lopez, William Elmer, William Gorenflow, and James Maycock to form Lopez, Elmer and Company. These 5 men understood that seafood was Biloxi's gold mine. They decided to travel to Baltimore, Maryland to see how the industry worked up there. They learned some valuable lessons, put them into practice, and thus Biloxi, the seafood capital of the world, was born. Their knowledge and their professionalism, their persistence, well, it led them all to be very wealthy men, and in turn created Biloxi's most benevolent benefactors. They built roads, schools, electric companies, ice companies. Well, they brought Biloxi into a new age. That was all right before I existed. I was born in 1886. The second and only other man I ever loved in my life was Robert Hart Chin. He was my second husband. Yes, you heard me right. I'm afraid my divorce from my first husband, Brantley Bond, shocked a good number of people in those days. I married Brantley in 1904. I had been attending the Sophie Newcomb College in New Orleans, and I left there just one class short of graduation. And why? To come home and get married at the ripe age of 18 years old. Well, Brantley also worked for the L&N, and that's how my father knew him. My parents gave us a beautiful big wedding in their lovely downtown large home. They had servants who took care of every detail of the wedding and the reception. The food was divine, the flowers exceptional, and the entertainment from New Orleans. The guests crammed into the house. I mean, it felt like all of Biloxi was there. Even the weather cooperated. Only one thing was missing: love. That's right. I wasn't in love with Brantley. Oh, he was a very suitable match, from a good family, with a great job in a bank and lots of potential. Only I was too young to realize that this was not love. I was thrilled to be a bride, not so much to be a wife. My father gave us a small fortune for our wedding gift, and he also built us a beautiful two-story Queen Anne home on Howard Avenue. I believe you call it the Bond Grant House now. Well, by the time I realized something was missing, we'd had a daughter, Vera Leola Bond. A couple of years after, her sister, Wilhelmina Linda, came along. I basically took the children and moved back home with my parents. By the time I filed for divorce, Brantley and I had not lived together for a good long while. By his own account, Brantley was heartbroken and humiliated. The girls missed their father. I suffered public ridicule and my reputation was damaged, and my family was embarrassed by the situation. But I had found the one my heart longed for, and there was nothing that was going to stop me. Hart had never been married. He was so handsome. I just don't understand why some girl hadn't gotten to him before me. I'd known him since we were in elementary school. We were just children together. We married 5 months after my divorce was final, on Armistice Day, November 11th, 1918. Hart was an officer stationed at Camp Sherman up in Ohio, and I traveled from Biloxi up to Camp Sherman for our wedding. We had no idea the war would end that very day. We spent the next 53 years making each other blissfully happy. We lived every single day to its fullest. I was so very proud of him. Well, Hart owned the very first automobile dealership in Biloxi and began selling automobiles before anyone had them. He also served as Biloxi's mayor for 2 separate terms of office. He won by a landslide both times. He did lose an election in between those 2 terms. That election made headlines because Hart refused to concede. I still say that election was stolen. Well, it's true. Hart had to be removed from City Hall by the National Guard. My Hart was a fighter, both in and out of City Hall. He got into his share of conflict and drama. He was a passionate man, and I loved that about him. We were quite a pair, the two of us. My advice to you, when you find your happiness, go after it. Let nothing and no one stand in your way. I certainly never regretted it. Thank you.
My name is Dolphy Ross, and this is my Allen girl story. I was born Adolph Ross on Dauphin Island, Alabama in 1883, but I've been Dolphy my whole life. In 1896, I, along with my 5 brothers and 5 sisters, arrived in Biloxi with our mother and father, Rahamer and George Ross Jr., on his schooner, the Oromay. They had 14 of us, but lost 3 before we made the move. Our father George dredged for oysters on the Oromay and other schooners and was a top-notch boat builder to boot. He also owned a grocery store at the corner of 1st and Pine Street where the family home was. Like my brothers, I learned to be a fisherman on that boat with him, but more important for me, he taught me how to build boats, which came to be my life's passion. Back then, some of the fishermen liked to participate in the annual schooner races, and my brother Captain Amos entered the race 6 times in the 1920s, winning a total of 4, including 3 in a row. With the changeover from fishing with schooners to luggers with power engines, I took an old schooner, cut it in half, and turned the front end into a trawler and named it the Wildcat, and taught my sons to be fishermen. I built several boats in my day, like the Clyde R, named after my youngest son, and the last boat I built in my own yard, the Mag Dolph, named after my wife Maggie and myself. Speaking of Maggie, lucky for me and my youngest brother Willie, our sister Ellen was married to Peter Weskovich. He too was a fisherman. He was originally from Alabama Port, which is right across from Dauphin Island, but he was a fisherman in Biloxi just like us. His sister Rosa was Maggie's mother, and she was married to George Allen. Now, our families knew each other well before we moved to Biloxi in '96. In the summers, while growing up, Maggie used to take the train from Alabama to Biloxi to visit Peter and Ellen. It was through those visits, albeit she was a bit younger than me, that I got to know her before the Allens moved to Biloxi in 1906. We were married a year later in December 1907, when Maggie was 16 years old. Maggie and I also had 14 children, lost 2 but raised 12, and had 4 of our 5 sons, being Bill, Ely, JB, and Clyde, decide to choose being a fisherman as a lifelong vocation. To do that kind of work, you got to have a strong woman at home to raise your kids when you're going on the water so much. With 12 kids home alone, let's just say Maggie had a lot of switches laying around. Our sons were blessed to have women like their mother Maggie to raise their kids just like she raised ours. None of us could have done what we did without them. Maggie was savvy in the ways of business, having a knack for buying and renting properties for people to live, many of whom were stationed right here out at Keesler. Thanks to her, in the late 40s, I was able to leave the water and the boat building behind to help her with her properties. Not that she ever really needed my help much. Retirement didn't last long, as I died on April 14, 1952, the day of our son Buster's 11th wedding anniversary, the day my mother would have been 98 years old, the same day 100 years before that our father, George, arrived at the port of New Orleans on the Arcadia from Europe as a little boy. And lastly, and sadly, the day in 2013 that our son Ely passed away, exactly 61 years to the day after me. 5 family members, 5 different life events, spanning 160 years, all on April 14th. Kind of spooky, huh? Uh-oh, I don't know if I should be saying that, considering where we're all at. With that, I'd like to introduce you to Margaret Louisa Allen Ross, my Maggie.
Thank you, Dolphy. I am Maggie Allen Ross, and I was born on August 23rd, 1891 in Alabama Port, Alabama. Like Dolphy said, on the weekends, my family and I would take the train into Biloxi to visit my aunt and uncle, Peter and Mary Ellen Weskovich. And on those visits, I would often watch the children for them. Mary Ellen had a brother named Dolphy, and boy, was he a dreamboat. We started dating soon and were married on December the 4th, 1907. I used to joke that before I was married, Peter and Mary Ellen were just my aunt and uncle, but after I was married, they became my brother and sister-in-law as well. A lot of love connections there, and you're going to hear some more in the stories to come. One of those connections is sitting with me right here today, my best friend Annie. Annie and I have known each other for about 80 years, and the connection that I have is that she's my sister. I love Annie so much. We had such a wonderful childhood. We used to go horseback riding together. We rode horses all over town. We had so much fun, didn't we, Annie?
Yes, we did.
We laughed and we played on those horses, kicking up dust. We had the best childhood. As an adult, I followed in my parents' footsteps and became one of the main persons to raise money for St. Michael's Church. You see, I was very good with money. I had a knack for money, and I had great financial intelligence. I may have just been a housewife, but I was also a self-taught financial expert. I could buy and sell property at maximum profit, and I was an excellent negotiator. In my spare time, when I wasn't managing my properties or taking a switch to one of my 12 youngins, I loved to garden. My favorite flower was the daisy. I was often known to be seen wearing the daisy flower ring. Loved my daisies. In addition to gardening, I also loved going to church. I never missed a Sunday, and I read my Bible every day. One of my other favorite pastimes was going to the picture shows. Oh, how I loved the movies. Loved going to see all the new ones on every weekend. My favorite thing to do, though, was to go dancing. And on the weekends, I would go dancing, even after I was married. Don't tell Dolphy. Well, it's too late. He found out already, and I got in trouble. So let me tell you what happened. One weekend, Dolphy told me he was going away on a business trip, and he did. So I thought that would be a wonderful opportunity to go dancing with my girlfriends. So I dropped my children off with my mother-in-law, and I went dancing. Well, I had the most wonderful time. I loved dancing. Like I told you, it was my favorite pastime. Well, when I got home, guess who was waiting for me? You guessed it. Dolphy was there waiting for me. I got in so much trouble. He put an end to my dancing days. Well, at least going out dancing. I still danced at home. That's how I stayed young my whole life. So when I died, by the time I died, I had 55 grandchildren. That's a lot, right? That's a lot of loving. But I had 108 great-grandchildren, and I had 19 great-great-grandchildren. I died on August 13th, 1983. I had a wonderful life. I loved life. I lived it to the fullest, feeling like a teenager for most of it.
And now I'd like to introduce you to my brother Willie so he can tell you his Allen girl story.
Hi everybody, well I am Willie Ross, and in case you were wondering how Dolphy and I came to marry sisters, well it's pretty simple. I used to hang around Dolphy an awful lot, and Annie would hang around Maggie an awful lot, and when those two started going together, so did we. It was a great little love story, really. In fact, I've experienced a lot of love in my life. Love for family, love for profession, love for place. I was born in 1895 in Dauphin Island, Alabama, but Biloxi and the Mississippi coast is where I belong. I grew up at the corner of Pine and First Street, and that's where my family taught me the trades that would shape my life, the seafood industry business and the grocery business. Well, we moved to Seymour and then later on to Howard Avenue, and during that time I became, if I must say so myself, one of the best trawl makers on the coast. It was a skill that literally tied my family together. My brothers would help me with those trawls, and so did my wife, Annie. She worked harder than I did. She would tighten and sew those nets together with me, and we would start on the outside and work our way until we met in the middle. And that illustrates what I think is a great marriage, a loving partnership. Well, I love making those trawls, and I loved carpentry, but I also love the environment. And that's one of the reasons why I became an inspector with the Environmental Conservation Control Agency. I was proud of that because I believe a strong and healthy habitat is good for business. So I was able to help protect the environment along with the jobs that came through it. I love my life. I love my family. I loved my job, and I loved the Mississippi coast. I believe that love is a great motivator to do great things. And I know my wife Annie would agree.
Yes, I do. I'm Annie Elizabeth Allen Ross, and I was born February 29th, 1904, and I passed away October 1987. 83 years. 83 years of a wonderful life. So many happy memories, and there was some sad ones too. But looking back over my life, I was truly blessed. Well, Mama and Daddy moved us here when I was just a little girl. Oh, how I loved Biloxi. We did have so much fun growing up here, didn't we, Maggie? We were a large Catholic family, and I was the baby of 7 children. We lived right across the street from St. Michael's Catholic Church. You know, some of my fondest memories was walking to Sunday Mass as a family. And then I met and married this man. December 19th, 1919. Now, if you're good at math, you've probably figured out I was only 15 years old. Now, don't be too quick to judge me, because in those days, it wasn't unusual for a girl to get married that young. Right, sis? Well, Willie and I, we had 7 children of our own. Sadly, our twin boys died in infancy, and those were some sad days for our family. I was so proud of Willie. He was a hard worker and so good at everything he did. He was a wonderful husband and a loving father. And you know what? We did work side by side, stretching and pulling and making those nets. And we built a successful trawl shop and grocery while raising our 5 children. Now me, I love to cook. I love cooking for our big family and all of our friends. And people would come from all around just to try to get a seat at my dinner table, especially if I was serving my gumbo. They'd say, "Why, Annie, we can't find better cooking at any restaurant anywhere." Gosh, how that would just tickle me. Those were the days. Well, my Willie passed away in 1952 after 33 years of a happy, happy marriage. He was still so young, and I thought we would have more time together. You know, I was a widow for 34 years. I truly lost the love of my life. Well, I sold our family business and our family home, and I moved to Indiana. And that was to live with one of my sons and his family. And you know what? He owned a grocery store too. And I was able to work alongside him for many years. Looking back over my life, I was truly blessed. My children loved on me and took care of me until my death in 1987. It was a wonderful life. Now, the 4 of us are not actually buried in this spot. Our final resting place is just north of the railroad tracks.
Welcome. I am Terry Jimenez Radovich and the sister of Daryl Jimenez. This is my family's final resting area. I'm sure many of you have come by here during the tour before and noticed how we have decorated the grave so elaborately for like Halloween. And you probably wondered, why would we do such a thing as this? Well, Daryl loved Halloween. So we do this in memory of him. My entire family loved Halloween. So when Daryl was little, he even started making homemade decorations for his family home. When his son Jared was 2, he decided to start to decorate his own home. And on Halloween, he would put a mask on and scare everyone that came up. And it just made him, thought he was so funny and made him so happy. When Jared was 10, he decided to build a haunted house in the garage. Well, this lasted for a while until that wasn't big enough, so he decided to make it on the front porch. Well, that was good enough for a while, but then he did the entire front yard. It became a yearly tradition in his neighborhood. Months before Halloween, the kids in the neighborhood would come up and ask Mr. Daryl, "What are you going to do this year?" When Daryl died in September of 2008, he had already started making plans for his displays and all for Halloween. So his wife, Becky, and I sat there, being distraught over him dying and seeing all his plans, decided we just can't let his decorating, go away. So we decided we would bring Halloween to him. Thus began the tradition of us decorating this grave every year in memory of him.
I'm Jared, son of Daryl Jimenez. He loved his life and loved being a dad. I started school at North Woolmarket Elementary whenever it was a brand new school. He immediately became involved in the PTA. He was PTA president for 8 years. We organized many fundraising events in order to buy new playground equipment. He and his mother founded Pickle Day at the school. She also made grab bags and other things for the kids. My Aunt Terry is still following in her mother's footsteps by making kids happy with little treats and grab bags. He would sell world's finest chocolate every year. He even walked the parade route selling the bars so I could win the limousine ride to Sicily's every year. When I started playing soccer, my dad was always there. He helped at every practice and was happy to pick up other players to get them to practice. He set up a snowball stand for me whenever I was 7 years old. The neighbors would come by every day, buy snowballs, sit and talk. Dad became involved in the North Bay area Mardi Gras parade and built 3 floats for our family because we love Mardi Gras also. He started with a small one and progressed to a larger float as our family increased in size. The name of our float was Proud Mary, which is named after my grandmother. When I got older, we started working on a truck. The truck is pictured on my dad's tombstone. We put it in several shows and had a TV in the back so we could sit and watch TV at the shows. Dad was a family man. He married my mom, Becky, in 1988. Mary and George Jimenez were his mother and father. They were involved in everything he did. His brother, Kevin, died in 2016. We thank you for coming by to visit my dad. I'm sure he's smiling big. We hope you enjoy our efforts every year to decorate this place. We do it in honor of my dad and family. Thank you.
Thank you so much.